So good evening, everybody. Welcome to story time. So we're going to tell a story today. So let me just first share my screen. So I'm assuming everybody can see the screen. And today the story is called Kai Loses His Head. Whether that's figurative or literal, we're going to figure that out a little later. But it's a story of transformation. And it's a story about a young boy, a young little protector, who comes to the defense of his mother to protect her, and eventually he turns into a symbol of wisdom, strength, and overcoming obstacles. And so yesterday we had a discussion when we did the discussion about Jesus and the teacher of the supreme knowledge, and I think it was Sarantha and Andre that talked about doing service with a pure heart and just being a good person. And I think Andre brought up the topics about, on this journey of going inwards, you have to learn to forgive yourself. You need to learn to love yourself, and you need to sort of overcome fears as well before you progress further on this journey. And so it's very much about the inner child. And this story is also very much about this inner child as well. So where the story begins is uh, Kai's birth, and he was born from the celestial essence of his mother, and she basically uh, breathed life into him. Okay, he was made from sandalwood paste from her skin. She was shaped into a little boy, and then life was breathed into him. And he sort of he always had this natural tendency to protect and just to be a protector. And he would stand against challenges and just be a bit forthright as well. And one day, his mum was going to bath, and so she asked young Kai to protect her, just guard the door. And so young Kai took up his little wooden sword and was marching up and down in front of the door, playing soldiers, protecting his mum while she's having her bath. And so he was really in child play mode, with his imagination flying and absolutely happy and elated with life and so forth. And after a while, a stranger approaches, and it was a very ominous feeling. He heard these heavy footsteps. He saw this very tall, strong, imposing figure. This man was dark but had a ash pale skin, wild, crazy hair, and wild, crazy eyes. And he had a weapon in his hand, and he was walking directly towards Kai and his mum's place. Kai stands up with his wooden sword in hand, and he says, "You shall not pass." The stranger says, "Boy, get out of my way." Kai says, "You will not pass." The stranger says, "Do you know who I am, boy?" He says, "I do not care who you are. My instruction was not to let anybody pass this into the home, and that is what I'll do." And suddenly the tension in the room got worse. The, the feeling became ominous. The stranger started to attack Kai, and there was a ferocious battle that actually ensued. And Kai fought with all his strength to protect his mother, and that little wooden sword didn't last long, but it held up for a short while. And there was a relentless attack from this stranger, attacking him from all angles and with a lot of fury as well. And there was a devastating blow. There was a fatal strike. The stranger's trident slashed off his neck, and it was too late. The darkness fell. All was silent. There was simply just darkness. darkness for we don't know how long. And then suddenly there was a resurrection. Kai jolts awake, his senses overwhelmed, scattered thoughts, confused. He's struggling to orientate himself and his surroundings, feeling this rising panic. And his hands desperately reach up to touch his face, and it's an unfamiliar feeling. He's worried, he's panicking, he's really scared as a child. And when he comes to, he sees the stranger, and immediately that panic comes back in, and he reaches for his little sword again and to attack the stranger. A surge of anger in him as he faces the attacker. And his mother intervenes, and she grabs him and says, "Son, wait, I need to tell you something. You are safe, it's okay." Uh, Kai looked into her eyes with in desperation, in confusion, unable to understand what happened. And the mother explains that it was his father. The tall, dark stranger was his father. He didn't know about him. And it was an accident. The the He didn't mean to kill him. He didn't know it was his child. And the father reaches out and apologizes and says, "Sorry, I didn't know." And um, it was anger that took over me. And Kai was, with this trauma in his system, he immediately forgives his father. And so, if you hadn't figured it out, this is actually it's the birth story of, not birth story, the origin story of Ganesha. And, but I try to tell the story now from a sort of, from Ganesha's point of view. So not the way the story is normally told, but how he would have seen this. And so Ganesha, imagine now, as a child, is now had an elephant head attached to him. In the story, what had happened was when Shiva decapitated him with this trident, they were unable to place back the head, and his mother Parvati threatened to destroy the entire universe if her son was not brought back. And she, being this Shakti energy, she was fully capable of doing so. And so I would say shit hit the fan rather. And they had to desperately seek for a head to put onto the boy. And essentially, they had to look for the first head animal they could find. And the first animal they found with its head facing east, I think it was, it was an elephant baby. And they took that head and they placed it onto Ganesha. And so you can imagine now this child who's had his head cut off. Not only that, it's got replaced by an elephant head. So birthday parties and bar mitzvahs are probably a bit uncomfortable. And to live with this trauma of what happened to him as a child. And so if you didn't figure that out, I guess the symbolism of the story is that Ganesha is your inner child. He's the one that has to deal with whatever crippling childhood memories you had, whatever emotional turmoil you had. In this case, he had daddy issues, I guess. And I think having your head cut off is a pretty traumatic experience. Okay. But despite all this trauma, what he was able to do was channel it and transmute it in a way that made him achieve one of the highest states of achievement in terms of enlightenment as a being. So this story is not a tragic story, but it's a story of wisdom. It's a story of strength, it's a story of resilience and transformation. And it's actually a story of you, because Ganesha is no other than your inner child. And sort of in this journey towards the discovery of self, this is the first entry gate you need to pass. It's the overcoming of fears. It's that basic transformation that has to happen. And so if you look at the Vedic chakra system, okay, Ganesha is a deity that sits within the root chakra. And so in the system of chakras, the root chakra is the lowest. It's the base chakra. It's like your first gear in your car. That's the orange one is the second gear, the yellow one is the third gear, and so forth. But it's almost like if you had to get up to the top floor of the Burj Khalifa, you have to start on the ground floor. And this is why symbolically in Hinduism, they always say you worship Ganesha first, you acknowledge Ganesha first, because he is the start, he is the base. And without his blessing or his support, you cannot progress on this journey inwards, upwards, and so forth. And the first thing that comes up is fear. You need to tackle your childhood fears, your fears throughout your life. And Ganesha is there to help you do that. So I think this is the last slide or second last slide. I'm drawing back to our initial first chat that we had yesterday. And so it's going back to, really being a good person and walking the right path. The ability to just forgive and forgive unconditionally and accept whatever has happened. And the ability to love yourself. So I've written there that the greatest love of all, I think it's a Whitney Houston and George Benson song. And then really it's about overcoming fears and rising to that challenge. And in a way as well with Ganesha, you also shall not pass until you've healed that inner child and moved past those obstacles in your life. So Ganesha in a way is a helper, but he's also a sort of quality gate to make sure that you pass it in the right way. And so having said that, I don't know how long I spent. So it wasn't too long. It was about 12 minutes. Going to say thank you. And from all of us, all beings, we are you and you are that. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to open for some questions. So did you like story time?
That out was informative. Thank
Hello?
you.
Oh, hi.
Very nice.
Good. Did I miss anything in the story? Did you guys follow it logically, or were there any missing gaps that I need to explain?
Story about the head. How he
So,
got the elephant head.
You want to know how he got it, or
Why was it the elephant head?
why was it the elephant? So, according to the story, or from what I know, it was sort of they were very desperate because this child now had his head severed off, and they could not replace that original head. And as I said, Parvati basically declared war on Shiva. So she probably dropped the frying pan on his head. But basically, she said she's prepared to destroy the entire universe if this child is not resurrected. And so Shiva and his ganas had to run off into the forest. He sent some ganas to look for the first being they could find where they could replace the head. And the first creature they found was this animal, this elephant who was sleeping next to his mother. And they took his head and used it on and cut its head off and used it onto Ganesha and merged on.
So it was a baby that was
Yes, from a
it was
baby.
the baby that was killed.
Correct. He was about not a baby, he was like 6. So I think when his mom manifested him, she manifested him as probably like a 5 or 6-year-old boy.
No, I'm talking about the elephant baby
Oh,
that
the
was
elephant baby.
killed.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was a
yeah. It was
life taken for a life.
it was a life taken. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They took his life
Mm.
to replace that head.
Mm.
So very interesting perspective you took for it all, because as you were talking about the story,
Hmm.
I immediately recognize the story because it's a
Yeah,
story that's been told,
yeah, yeah.
uh, uh, yeah, a number of times, or you've read it in books or cartoon books or whatever.
Hmm.
So it was interesting that you took the view of how Ganesha saw it as a child, because it's often told um,
Um,
sort of like from either like a third person point of view
Hmm. Hmm.
of, and not from the child's point of view.
Yeah.
I I somehow recall, and I must go check on it. I think the one issue that came up as to why Ganesha became a god was Parvati, or the child, had had an anxiety about, I am not good enough now. Everyone is going to mock me because I've got an elephant's head.
Hmm.
And Shiva, to that extent, said, "Never you fear. You will. Everyone will revere you before they can worship me." And
Okay.
that's how he. Uh, yeah, but it was because of that um, fear,
embarrassment.
embarrassment, fear of being mocked,
Yeah.
fear of being laughed at, because a child with the elephant head, Um, so that's how he was given God status, I want to put, or
Yeah.
thing. But it is, the essence of the story is true, that he had to deal. Fortunately, he had a father like Shiva that could make him a god,
Mhm.
but he had to deal with that anxiety, with
Yeah.
that humiliation, with that fear of being rejected before being.
Accepted.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can
Okay.
see Jurishni completes my words.
She completes you. Uh, yeah, for
Thank
me,
you.
it's more about I think the story goes beyond what the message is, and it's really beyond what the messenger is, and it's really we need to understand the main takeaway. And the main takeaway is,
Mm,
what does this mean for you? And
Mm.
so, for example, uh, I was speaking to someone who had done like this 10-day Vipassana meditation, and the Vipassana is really targeting your higher chakras. But this fellow had big fear issues. And so my advice to him was not to focus on those higher chakras at the moment, because the first thing you need to break is that fear. You cannot pass on the spiritual journey unless you get, I would say, you get the blessings of Ganesha. And that means the ability to overcome those obstacles and your fears and that inner child healing. And I'm sure my wife can add something there if she's not daydreaming.
No, you're
oh,
doing
yes,
well. You're doing well. You're doing well. I'm listening. I want to see where it goes with the inner child. And unfortunately, we don't have fathers like Shiva, as Dina said. So how do we heal that? Um, how do we heal that inner child?
Mhm. And you've got experience in that. You can tell us at least a
But
few.
I'd like to hear others' opinion. I mean, we have some
Oh,
some
yes,
very
yes,
spiritually educated people here, and I'd like to also hear from them.
yeah. I think from a medical
Mm.
side as well, and an
Well,
alternative side.
Well, I mean, maybe the first step is really trying to understand your trauma, understand your history. So, going back and trying to understand it, because a lot of the time I suppose, just caught up in feeling these emotions, anger, anxiety, and we don't really understand where it's coming from. But so I think Ganesha knew his story, and he understood, once he understood what happened. Because I think a lot of us, we learn to love ourselves through our experience. So if we've had a traumatic experience, then we find it hard to love ourselves, because we haven't experienced love. So going back and understanding our histories is quite important, processing it. So removing the obstacles. I think the obstacle is the difficulty to love yourself because you've experienced trauma. Mm.
Yeah. So I just wanted, if we have time to share the story, I had a client, and for those of you that don't know, I do Reiki and energy work. So I work on your energy field. So it's not anything that Ravi does with the, it's just energetic. And during the session, it came up very strong that she had some issues on her sacral chakra and her root chakra. And I know sacral is the inner child as well, and it's where we store our emotions. And she had trauma where she saw her brother explode as they were. Where did I tell you which country? Oh, somewhere in Africa.
Namibia, I think.
Namibia, and it was. He picked up a shell of
Landmine, I think it was, huh?
yeah, and he picked up the shell and it exploded, and she watched his arm kind of and his inside spill out, and they were going to school in primary school, so she must have been about 7 or 8. And this came up during the session. It came up energetically, and she wasn't thinking about it, and she didn't even know that it was still there, that she was holding onto this trauma. So sometimes we're not even aware of certain things that have happened. We've pushed it down so deep that it's just not in our conscious. It's a very subconscious thing. And we kind of worked on that, and to cut a long story short, of course, it changed the way she exactly sees the world, the way she sees herself, because underlying that became guilt and forgiveness for herself, because she felt guilty. Why didn't I stop my brother from picking that up? Why didn't I, all the guilt that follows something like that. And yeah, sometimes this trauma we're not really aware of. That is so deep.
And she's looking at helping her brother, but she was only a child herself.
Herself, yeah. And then, of course, carrying guilt for not helping and not stopping him. And yeah.
I think, Raul, the interesting thing, just from a psychotherapy point of view, is that a lot of the stuff you're talking about is like the essence of psychotherapy. So a big part of it is like inner child work, uncovering traumas, healing from trauma. And then the journey of psychotherapy really is self-realization as well, so it's really, God realization, self-realization, all the stuff you've been speaking about in the last day. Yeah, fits in perfectly with that.
Awesome. Celine, anything else to add? Not that type of trauma. Huh? This is emotional trauma. Huh?
No, thanks, Rob. Great, great. So, like for me, right, and Ganesha specifically, I was told when I was, well, from the time I know, that's my star sign, Ganesha, uh, by my mother. And I don't know how she came to that conclusion, but she told me that. And up to today, he still keeps saying me, Ganesha is your star sign. Uh, I can't explain it. I don't know why. And yeah, that's it for me. Help.
Help.
Help. Explain. Like, why did she say that's my star sign?
You need to ask her. I don't know. There's something something about you that resonates, probably that, or resonates with that energy. I don't know. I don't know. You have to ask her. We need to bring her on.
So, okay, so let me refine my question. Is there like a specific period in your life that you're born where you are Ganesha, like a star sign?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know. Not that I know of, but that I could be very much mistaken as well. No, I don't know.
Okay.
I have a question, if I may,
Oh,
to Ravi. So, what if you did not have a traumatic experience? Because you said you had a trauma. If someone has a traumatic experience in the past, they need to reflect on it and overcome it, right? To find this maybe happiness or whatever the person is seeking. But what if you never went through something traumatic and try to improve your now?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting one because I'd say the majority of people that I see actually haven't been through what we would, see as like hectic traumas. It's often subtle things, it's perceptions, it's feeling unloved, without often any malicious intent by the parents. So, um, but I suppose with an experience that you have in childhood, often finding it difficult to love yourself, putting like a conditional acceptance of yourself rather than unconditional acceptance of yourself. And so often it's very subtle things. Um, just certain things that are reinforced, like say performing and then receiving love, and then that condition being reinforced over the years will develop an unconditional acceptance or love for yourself. So understanding sometimes quite subtle things like that.
Yeah,
So it may
thank
not
you.
be like what we see as a big trauma, like abuse or something. It might be quite a subtle thing that forms this conditional acceptance rather than a unconditional love for yourself.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question.
that answers, yeah, for sure. Thank you.
anyone else?
So I think probably we all actually have some kind of trauma. And just as Ravi is saying, it's not like an overt abuse kind of trauma. And it's something that we probably don't talk about because, for example, we were brought up in a certain way in a household where, like academics is at the foremost of, our lives. And that's how we grew up, and everything was about performing. And our parents brought us up the way they were brought up because that's all that they knew. But they are applying it to a different generation of people who are growing up in a different environment. And so you sometimes can't apply those same rules, but you can't blame them either because they didn't know any better. And for myself, I have to say I grew up in a very strict environment. And everything was about academics and things like that. And I told myself that I would not bring my children up the same way. But at the same time, I don't hold it against my parents because I know that they didn't know better. And as they are growing older, I also do see a difference in them and kind of acknowledging, that maybe things could have been a little different, but I mean, it is what it is now. So I made sure that when I bring my children up, that I give them a little bit of trust in a way, responsibility, allow them to make mistakes rather than trying to control every decision that they make. And I see a huge difference in them and kind of empowering them in a way different to the way I was. So a lot of the things that we sometimes do, being overachievers, Sometimes it is like a childhood trauma response, rather than, just like your brilliance shining through. It's just because of the way we're brought up sometimes.
Yeah. So I often say to patients, like, do you know, like how you speak to your kids, the language that you use to your kids? It's okay, you tried hard. You definitely, you're worthy. It doesn't matter how well you do. So our inner voice, our language towards ourselves needs to be more similar to that. Because often we'll speak to ourselves in a different way. We hard on ourselves.
That's correct.
But we speak to our kids. So try to mold how you speak to your kids and make that your own inner voice towards yourself. It won't come naturally, but that's the goal.
That's the hardest thing to actually achieve, is like being as compassionate to yourself as you might be to other people.
So for a long time, I had this quote on my refrigerator for my kids that said, be kind to yourself because your soul is listening. And I thought that's such a...
It's beautiful.
Yes. And absolutely what you guys saying. Yes, 100%. We have to, our words hold so much energy. And when we put it out there, that's also what we're attracting. That's what is kind of growing as well. And so we have to, and like our thoughts as well, we think of God's in words, and that holds an energy. So we have to be kind always. Yeah.
It's quite a lot like rewiring your brain, really, to think differently. But the moment you start doing that, it takes some time, but it becomes more automatic than default to, those negative thoughts, like shaming yourself. But it does take time. It's like, holding back when you are angry with someone. If you're able to do that and reframe your thinking, then you're automatically rewiring your brain. And that's how you change the narrative.
Yeah. But when we have trauma, or not even trauma, I call it energetic blocks from childhood. It could be simply, as you were saying, it could just be you're in a shopping mall and you don't see mom for a second, and that creates that fear, that energy. Oh, there's mom, but that energetic block is already created, and then we start reacting from there. So whenever we're in a relationship and we kind of become insecure, he's gonna if a partner walks out or does, it's kind of, we react and we don't respond anymore, and we react from that trauma that sometimes we're not even aware of. So yeah, definitely we need to heal that.
Please, you remember we had that discussion, I think a couple of months ago, where we talked about what happened after school at the recreation ground and that traumatic incident, and how the parents didn't handle it in the way that, or it was handled in a different way to what you have done it this.
I was actually thinking of that when we were talking now, because let's see, 1, 2, 3. There were 4 of us on this call, right? That was there, Seelan, Ravi, myself, and Dashni. And I'd say that was why I was thinking about it. It's probably the most traumatic thing I've ever been through in my entire life. Yet, for me, and we've talked it through, it doesn't make, in my mind, maybe it's not as significant as other events in my life that are, like Shireen said, maybe not finding my mom and dad in a shopping center might have been more traumatic than being held up for 6 hours, something like that, right? As a group of people. So when you were talking about it, I actually reflected on it because, Ravi, we've spoken about it recently, for example, where, yeah, our parents weren't equipped to send us for therapy to go and check whether how we felt. I mean, young Seelan here was one of the guy we laughed about it, right? After whatever happened to us, we laughed. That was our traumatic response or coping mechanism. But I genuinely, for me personally, never looked at that very traumatic event as something that defined me. But I know there are other things in my life, in my childhood, that are more traumatic than that actual event. So that's what I was actually thinking about when we were talking about it today. That trauma is what the mind lets it be. You know, maybe I don't know. Maybe Ravi wants to weigh in. Yeah, I don't. That's
Yeah, you're right. That no, I don't want to be on the camera. Um, for some reason it has been blocked out, but it when we go through things now, that never comes up as well. It never has.
I've never ever thought about that as a traumatic event, or despite it being. But coming back to your question, Raul, is like I think we as a group we've been talking about it. How come your parents not send us for counseling or therapy? So I think coming back to what you said earlier, it's our parents were equipped in a different era with different skill sets, to what we would like. If one of our kids, like if young Kai gets held up, for even, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, I think we'll send him for trauma counseling the next day, Probably if he loses his mobile phone, we have to send him for trauma counseling.
Yeah. When we know better, we do better, I guess, eh? And I think the parents just didn't know. They didn't know what they didn't know. And they just work on what tools they had at that time.
But
The
it's
interesting
also
thing about
highlighting.
what?
Sorry,
Go on,
Ravi,
Dylan.
go.
No, that's okay.
So,
Go.
so it's highlighting the aspect of perception, and it speaks to what Elias was saying as well, or referred to. Something may not be traumatic, but your perception of it has a far greater role of defining that incident on you. And something that was actually very traumatic is seen as insignificant. Bringing me down to the perspective that it's all in your mind, it's all in your thought, your being. Whether physically traumatic or not, it's how you feel it, how you perceive it, that lays out your being. Yeah, that's it.
I think so. I think I think that's an interesting thing, just if you look at that, what would seem like quite a severe trauma will probably have less impact than very subtle early childhood stuff with your parents. A mom with postpartum depression or anxiety and the impact on the child, trying her best, but just, compared to something as hectic as what we experienced there, the impact of, that on the attachment and how you feel about yourself, your self-esteem, much more impactful than what looks like a terrible trauma.
No,
and often those very early things that happen, a very early stage before the age of 2, we have no conscious memory of it. So it's kind of in your unconscious, but it affects how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, and lots of trauma is very much related to like your very personal relationships, like with your mother or siblings or caregiver.
My question was going to be, with your experience, right? Is it like I was going to ask the metric, and you already just kind of alluded to it, that maybe pre 2 years is like maybe I don't know, like a golden age of where, trauma is most felt, up to maybe, is there another up to 10, and then after 18, that trauma is less so?
Yeah, I think the first, say, 2 to 3 years, majority of personality development and stuff happens.
Okay. Very interesting.
So the brain is also the first, so like exponentially kind of learning. Cells are growing, multiplying, and then it's kind of the curve slows down like that. So in the first 0 to 5 years, it's like a curve going up like that, and then exponentially growing, and then in terms of the brain cells and all of that, and everything that you're learning. So what
like
you
0
learn
to
very
5.
early on is very impactful.
Okay.
And Ravi, how do you sort of diagnose or handle cases where, let's assume the trauma is very early, and the person is, how can I say, doesn't know what they don't know. It's there somewhere in the unconscious. It's coming out as a leak, but how do you go about like handling a case like that? Or
so it's I think as far as possible you try and uncover the unconscious. But sometimes it's not possible for them to have memory of what's caused the problem. And then the process of therapy is just to almost like remother the person, basically to love them, unconditionally love them, accept them, and then in the process of therapy, in that relationship, people heal. But obviously it takes much longer time but it's often like through a loving relationship, caring, loving relationship. And then we have that as well hopefully with our partners, friends, ourself, learning to love yourself spiritually, all these methods of almost remothering yourself, overcoming the trauma. Sometimes you may not know what it was, but you can still overcome the obstacle because there's only one truth that is, you are worthy, you are lovable, so we know the truth. So irrespective of what the trauma is, the answer is still the same thing. If you can figure out the trauma, sometimes it's easier then to work through it and realize that this is, what it was. But even if you don't know what it was, you can still get to just through the process of meditation and connecting with the self. You don't need to know that someone cut off your head. You just need to know that even if they did or whatever the reason was, you are perfect. You are you. And so the method is still the same.
Wonderful. I'm
So,
thinking that.
sorry.
No, go for it, please.
So, Viz, you don't think that perhaps certain things you guys, the way you respond, certain fears you have, certain, I don't want to say issues, but you know what I'm saying, is actually linked to that, what you went through, but you are not linking it to that. Like, and going back to the client I had that had the severe trauma, she was 6 years old. She had forgotten it, but there was a lot of stuff she was doing within her career, within her marriage, that she was like, oh my goodness, this is why I do this. This is why I feel like that. And only during her session, when it sort of unveiled itself, could she start saying, okay, this is why I have been, this is why I'm behaving the way I've been behaving, or I'm, that kind of thing. And do you not think there could be certain behaviors that you guys have, or as I say, responses?
As a result.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
Sorry?
As a result of that traumatic event.
Yes, but you're not aware because, as Ravi is saying, and it can be something you're not aware of. Your head's been cut off, but so it doesn't mean that it hasn't affected you.
No,
and is not still a block that you need to release on or something you need to work on because you're not feeling it the way you think you should.
Very likely, highly likely. It's just that that event took place when we were probably in our 19, 20. We were about that age. But you're right. We don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But something inside of me probably thinks it's. I've always had this feeling that if there's anything that's stopping me from being the best version of myself, would be related to an event that is very like Ravi said, even in the formidable 0 to 5 years. I somehow have this feeling. I actually have this. And and Ravi and I have spoken at length about this. But I also like what Ravi's saying. You don't need to analyze why the head was cut off. Because I guess that's where probably I am at. I'm at that point where I want to know. I can't remember, and I don't know, for a lot of, again, we were having this conversation probably a couple of weeks ago, and even today, I think one of my conversations was, we can't remember. Do you remember? Hey, isn't your memory better? I think this morning, um, we were talking about whose memory is good. Can you remember this? I can't remember certain things, and the question I was going to ask Ravi, which is, like, I have this willingness to almost try the retrogression therapy, to go back into this past, or to this point where I can maybe unlock and understand what was it that affected me. It could be I lost my pencil. I don't know. But let's find out. But another part of me is like, oh God, it's so difficult to, how many hours of therapy is that to go and find that? Whereas maybe the better thing is to just say, I'm not asking why my head was cut off. It was cut off. Let's just apply the tools to actually soften the blow and get the therapy. So yeah, so I think that was quite, I like what Ravi was saying there. But I don't know whether I like it because it's easier than dealing with the trauma. I'm not sure.
Sometimes it's not easy. Like, the interesting thing is, about trying to remain in silence is, we talk about, you could be distracted by, itching. I always say, like in therapy as well, you don't have to scratch unless it's itching. So if it's itching and you can't be silent, then there's maybe something you do have to scratch and figure out why. But if you can't be at peace, then you might need to like scratch a bit more. But the aim is to be at peace. If you can get there without scratching, then that's
And am I right? I would say that everyone's built a bit differently. There's those who need to scratch and some who can meditate through it. You know what I mean? We're just wired differently. Right?
yeah, I think I think so. But yeah, I think we're trying all the methods,
Yeah.
Where the aim is to get to peace, and yeah.
Interesting topic,
Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah.
interesting conversation, guys, as well. I think the presentation is more just a substrate to have a discussion. And this is where I think the magic is in this discussion, rather. And some very good insights there. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ravi.
like,
Thank
to,
you.
you know what? The common theme, if I can put it like that, is it all comes back to yourself. One me.
Mm.
Yeah.
So this is how I think about it. If we say, like, who are you? You are you before you. So meaning that you are, it's what life events that happens to you that changes who you are sometimes. So I think we keep evolving. I don't think we can ever really describe ourselves that we are a particular kind of person, because life keeps changing. Events have an effect, an impact on our lives. And that's what changes us. But maybe that is where the meditation and all of these other kind of forms of, if you want to call it therapy, come in, to bring you back to that place of peace and where you should be.
Agree.
Cool. Cool. Thanks a lot, Raul.
And so on that, I'm going to say thank
Brilliant.
you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And I hope you have a good snooze as well after that story time. And take care, everyone. We'll see you very, very soon, I'm sure.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.
you.
Thanks a lot, Raul.
Thanks, Raul.
Cheers. Bye-bye.